Hello again, everyone, and welcome to week three. 3 weeks in, we are actually almost halfway done with the term already in the course, which seems kind of crazy, but these 7-week terms, they really go by very fast. So yes, we really are almost halfway done. Um, and on that note, just make sure that you are really keeping up with all the work, because since it is a really short term, if you do start to get behind, it's really kind of difficult to catch up again, because you have this video to watch, you have a reading to do, you have a discussion to do, you have a paper to write, and then it starts all over again the very next week. So if you start to get behind, it's kind of difficult to catch up. This class, of course, I don't think that I have given you so much work that it makes it, I think that the workload is pretty reasonable for, what someone should be able to do in 1 week. So it shouldn't be hard to keep up. But just keep that in mind. If you do start to get behind, it does kind of steamroll and you get farther and farther behind, and then the term is over and you haven't finished your stuff, and so just try to keep up. Anyway, so this week you have a reading and a discussion and a paper due. So I'm going to talk to you about all of those things, give you a little information about that, and then you'll be on your way. So first of all is the reading. The reading is by John Swales. It's called something about discourse communities. I suppose I should know the real title of it, but the idea of a discourse community or something like that. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what discourse communities are. This is a text that is a little bit longer, a lot longer than the one from last week, and a little bit more difficult. So you're going to need to give yourself a lot more time for this one. That 10 minutes that you gave yourself for the one last week is not going to be enough for this one. It's not super long or like really hard, but it's definitely going to take a lot longer than 10 minutes to read it. So just keep that in mind. So John Swales wrote a book called Genre Analysis, and this is a chapter that comes from that book. You are going to be writing a genre analysis this week, and so this is why I wanted you to read this text during this week, to kind of get the idea of, some things about genre analysis and those kinds of things. But the point of this particular text is to define what a discourse community is and give you some examples. And so I'm going to help you through that a little bit, because his definition is kind of confusing if you're not used to the kind of jargon and things like that he uses. The word jargon, I don't know if I defined this term already, but the word jargon means technical vocabulary that's used by a particular group of people. So, for example, myself as a PhD in rhetoric and composition, there are a lot of words that I use. Discourse community is one of them. Genre is one of them. These kinds of terms that I use when I'm talking to my colleagues about our work, and people outside of my community or outside of my classes where I'm teaching them about these things, they would not understand those words in the same way that I use them. So those are jargon, because they're technical vocabulary that I use for my work in particular ways when I talk with my colleagues who also understand those words in the same way I use them. But people outside of that community would not understand those words at all, or would not understand them the way that I use them. So discourse community is one of those terms, and you all, not being a part of the community of PhDs in rhetoric and composition, don't know that word, or if you've heard it, you maybe don't understand it in the same way that I use it. So what is a discourse community? John Swales will give you a definition and we'll discuss it in details, but I'm going to talk you through a little bit the ways that I kind of think of it. We are going to be mostly discussing in this class, we're focusing on a professional discourse community. So your major, your career field is a discourse community. So we're thinking of people who do similar kinds of work, who talk about their work using similar kinds of vocabulary, who read similar kinds of texts about their work, who write things that might be read by other people in that community, etc. So PhDs in rhetoric and composition, or English professors, that could be part of it, or that could be one. Those people are a discourse community. I could write something that somebody in Florida or Washington State reads, and they will understand what I'm talking about. They might have similar experiences because they also work in a university, they also teach first-year composition classes, etc. So that community, and I may not ever meet those people. They're part of my discourse community, even though I may not ever meet them, because they do similar kinds of work. We may all go to the same conferences. We may be on the same like newsletter chain, email chains or whatever. We read the same journals. We talk about our work in similar ways. That's why those people are part of my discourse community, even if I've never met them. Okay, so we're thinking of things like doctors are a discourse community, biologists are a discourse community, psychologists are a discourse community. So whatever your career field is, your career path, whatever your job description is going to be, your job is going to be, pharmacists, whatever it is, that's your discourse community, okay? So through your genre analysis that you're gonna write, you are talking about how that genre is used within that discourse community. So what is the purpose for those people, for that particular community? The intended audience is often people in that community, although that might be different depending on what your genre is. So for example, if you're doing a business plan or something like that, the intended audience is not other business owners. The intended audience is possible investors or lenders, the people at the bank that you're trying to get a loan from. So your business plan might have other audience members. You also might be writing a genre that is intended for your customers, or it's intended for, say, if you're doing, for example, if you're education and you're doing something like a syllabus, the intended audience is not necessarily people in your community, it's your students, right? So when I give you a syllabus, you're my intended audience for that particular document or an assignment prompt. So it depends on what genre you've chosen, who that intended audience is. But a lot of times the intended audience is other people in your discourse community. So the term discourse community comes up in the assignment prompt. And so just understand what that means. So do the reading. There's a discussion this week also to have you define what a discourse community is and talk about why that's an important concept to kind of to have in your head when you're thinking about writing. So do the reading first, start the discussion, and then get into the assignment. So speaking of assignments, so you have your first draft of your genre analysis due this week. I have called it a genre analysis / how-to guide. And here's the reason for that, because I think for you conceptually to think about how to write this up, it's easier to think of it as a how-to guide than to think of how to write a genre analysis. But I'll talk you through that in a minute. So, but here's the first thing. So it's sometimes difficult to understand the purpose of a genre analysis, which is why I call it a how-to guide, because that helps you to kind of think about, like, conceptualize what is the purpose of this thing I'm writing. But one of the texts that we read, that we will read, I believe it's the one by Windsor that we read in a couple weeks. She says something to the effect of, it's nearly impossible. She might actually say impossible. She may not even say nearly. It's impossible to write something well that you have never seen before. And this is a really important point. You cannot write well in a genre that you have never seen. So you can read how-to guides, you can get advice from people, you can ask your teacher about it, you can look at the rubric, the assignment prompt, whatever, you can understand the purpose. But if you have never seen one, it is nearly impossible, or even completely impossible, to write it well, because you don't know what it's supposed to look like. You can get advice all you want, but if you don't actually read parts of it and think through, or read all of it, not just parts of it, but read some and think about the types of topics they talk about, the way they organize it, Does it have subheaders? Do they use bullet points? Are there pictures? What kind of font do they use? I mean, all those kinds of like visual things on the page, but also what kind of style do they use? Is this super serious? Is it more lighthearted? Things like, is there creativity involved? Do you read 3 different ones and they all are kind of different, so you can see, okay, there's a lot of flexibility available in this genre? Or are they all exactly the same? They're all organized exactly the same way. The scientific research report is one of the most standardized genres of them all. They're all done almost exactly the same way. And so you can see that when you look at several of them. If you look at other genres, you can see that there's more creativity, that this one's a little different from this one. And so you can see that there's space for that you don't have to be super rigid in it. But if you didn't look at them, if you hadn't seen any, you wouldn't be able to do that. So for example, when I was applying for jobs quite a few years ago, one of the universities that I applied to asked me to write a diversity statement. It was the only university of all the places I applied that asked for that particular document. And I did not know what that was. I had never heard of a diversity statement. I didn't know the purpose of a diversity statement. I didn't know if I was supposed to talk about my own commitment to inclusive and diverse classrooms, or if I was supposed to talk about my own experience with diversity. I didn't know what it was supposed to be. Like, what is the point of it? So first thing I did was go online and just look up, like, what is a diversity statement, and get some information. So I looked at some stuff. I got some things about the purpose, the what they're usually used for, why universities ask for them, that kind of stuff. But then I went to Facebook. That's where I do everything. Facebook, and I posted, "Hey friends who are on the job market, has anyone had to write a diversity statement? Would you mind sharing it with me so I could see what it is?" And I got 3 or 4 of them sent to me from my friends. And I was able to look at them and see what they were writing in those diversity statements. And that's when I really sort of got it. Like, okay, you can read all the how-to guides or like information about a genre that you want, but once you actually see them, that's when you sort of start to get it. You're like, oh, okay, now I've seen 3 of them. I get it. This is kind of what they all do. This is what the purpose is. Here's how people talk about it. These are the kinds of topics they talk about, etc. Right? So anytime you're asked to write a genre you've never written before, you have to see some. If you've never heard of it, you have to get some examples and look at them to be able to do that sort of genre analysis. So I mean, an informal genre analysis is really needed anytime you're asked to write in a genre you haven't written before. If you don't do that, you will be less successful in writing that thing. So that's kind of the purpose of why we're doing this genre analysis. First of all, because you're going to have to practice writing this genre for the next paper. So I'm like making you do that process, right? Find some examples and let's analyze them. And I'm having you write it up as a more formal genre analysis, but which you wouldn't, of course, do if you were just, trying to learn to write a genre in your real life. But I want you to really think through, like, in more details, what is this genre doing, and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the purpose of it. The reason that I'm calling it a how-to guide is I think it helps you conceptualize why you're writing and what it's supposed to do. So I'm going to show you the first week one. In the week 1 video, I read to you the assignment prompt that I have posted on Canvas, but I have written up some more information about the assignment. So I am going to share my screen right here and just read that to you really quickly. And then we'll go from there. So you heard the genre analysis assignment prompt read to you a couple weeks ago, and it's on here also, so you can click on that to get more information as well. But I think this is going to be more helpful, what I have written here, because it really helps you conceptualize. So while the assignment prompt calls this a genre analysis, I want you to think of it as a how-to guide. If you were writing a genre or if you are writing a guide to how to write this particular genre, what would you need to say? Imagine someone who has never written the genre and is in need of help figuring out how to write it. What would they need to know? So that's what you're kind of thinking about. Like, if someone needed help learning how to write this genre, what are the things they need to know? And I've given you 3 main things that I think are important that they need to know, but you do not have to follow this. Although I think these are the important things to talk about. So just keep that in mind. So here's a way you might organize. But of course, you can organize this however you want, and you don't necessarily have to do it this way, but this can be really helpful if you need help. So just an introduction, of course, that introduces me to the genre we're talking about, gives some background information, etc. And then the purpose is really important. If you don't know why this genre exists, you're not going to be able to write it very well. So you need to know why this genre exists. What work does this do for the discourse community? It's sometimes easier to think of that in the reverse or backwards. What work could not be accomplished if this genre didn't exist? So thinking about the diversity statement for me, I needed to know what the purpose was. Like, is the purpose to to show them that, do they want to know my commitment to diversity? Do they want to know how I have worked with diverse students in the past, or my experience working with diverse students? Or like, do they want to know if I take an anti-racist approach to teaching? Do they want to know like how I build an inclusive classroom? You know, like, I didn't know what the purpose was, right? So if you don't know the purpose, then you don't know what you're supposed to say, right? So thinking through like, what work is this going to do? What work can't be done in this community if this genre doesn't exist? So thinking through why this thing exists, what is the purpose? What is really the goal of this thing, right? So that's the one of the most important things. And then we want to talk about who the intended audience is. Now, I don't want you to tell me that anyone can read this. And this I get all the time. You're talking about medical, whatever, like a doctor's case report or something, and you say something like, these documents can be read by anyone. No, actually they can't. I mean, maybe technically anyone could figure out how to access them, but first of all, there's usually a paywall, so not everyone can access them. You have to have, a university or a hospital that has a good library system to be able to access them. And secondly, not everybody wants to, and not everyone will. I don't think I have ever in my life read a doctor's case report, and I probably never will. And you probably won't either unless you're the one that's doing that particular genre, right? So don't tell me that everyone can read them. Also, really think about who the intended audience is. Don't tell me that the patients are the audience for case reports, because they're not. They're not. The patients are not going to be reading them. So really think through, who is this written for? Who is the intended audience for this? So, and then think through what the characteristics that those people have to possess in order to read it. For example, if we're talking about that doctor's case report, I don't have the characteristics because I probably would read the doctor's case report and have no idea what he's talking about, because I am not a doctor. If the doctor is talking about how she did some sort of, medical intervention, gave some sort of drugs, yeah, whatever, I don't know any of that, and neither do the patients. As I was saying, they don't understand any of that stuff for the most part. So you have to think about what kind of characteristics do the people have to have in order to be able to write this. For example, as I say here, if you're looking at a scientific research report in chemistry, the intended audience would need to have a very high level of knowledge about chemistry to be able to understand them, right? So you're thinking through, okay, this is written for other chemists, right? It's not just written for anybody, it's written for specifically for other chemists. And then you want to think through, why are those people reading them? What work is it helping them to accomplish? All right, so who are the intended audience? What characteristics do they have to have in order to be able to read this? And then why are they reading them? What is it helping them accomplish in their own work? And then we're talking about the characteristics of the text itself, right? So what are the typical features of the genre? What topics are discussed? How is it organized? What is the format? Does it use subheaders? Does it have pictures and graphs? How does it look on the page? What kind of vocabulary does it use? Here is where you're really telling me how to write it, keeping in mind the purpose and the intended audience. All right, so you're talking, this is where you would talk about the style and tone, if it's super lighthearted, if it's super serious, if it's really informal or if it's really formal. All of that kind of stuff would go here in this section on the actual characteristics of this particular genre. And then you just have some sort of conclusion to wrap it up. So really this could be depending on how large your paragraphs are. This could kind of be a 5-paragraph essay, but you could also break this up into several paragraphs. So you could talk, I mean, like the audience part, you could say who the intended audience is in one paragraph and talk about them, what characteristics those people have to have. And then a different paragraph could be how those people are using them, why they read them, etc. You could have multiple paragraphs on the characteristics. You might want to talk about the style and tone in one paragraph. You might want to talk about the organization and the format and that kind of stuff in another paragraph. So yeah, you might break that up, right? So it could be a 5-paragraph essay, but you probably are going to need to break that up a little bit more. All right, so again, this is always due at the end of the week on Sunday. So this is your first draft. You will upload that and I will give you feedback on it. And then you will need to revise for the second draft. Let me take that back. This one does not have a first draft. I forgot about this. In the 7-week term, we don't have time to do multiple drafts for every single paper. So only the final paper has 2 drafts. I forgot about that. Yeah. So, but I mean, obviously, as I said before, multiple times, the grading is not difficult. So even though we're not doing a first draft on this, you shouldn't really worry that your grade is not going to be, as long as you have followed the assignment prompt and followed the guidelines, and it's as long as it's supposed to be, you should get all your points. If you have any questions about any of that, just send me an email and I will get back to you right away. And I think that is it for today. So get to work on your stuff and let me know if you need any help. All right, I will talk to you again next week.